Physicians are trained in the art of medicine, science, and healing. We call this the practice of medicine. But healthcare is a business. SMA's Business of Medicine podcast is designed to educate physicians on a wide range of business topics with the purpose of empowering physicians with the business knowledge they need to better enjoy the practice of medicine. This podcast is sponsored by SMA Services. SMA Services is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Southern Medical Association, founded in 1984 to address the business and financial needs of physicians.
Today we are again joined by Richard Campbell, Nancy Farron, and Peter Jamison with Veritas Medical Real Estate Advisors. Richard is the founder of Veritas. Nancy is a registered nurse who joined the team in 2018, and Peter, who entered commercial real estate in 2014, joined Veritas Medical Real Estate Advisors in 2017. In the second of this two-part series, they continue sharing information for physicians in training that revolves largely around building a knowledge base and awareness as it relates to medical real estate and how it might affect the decisions residents and fellows have as they come out of their training programs. Before we jump into the specifics of part two, would you like to give listeners an overview of what was discussed in part one?
Thank you, Jennifer, and again to the Southern Medical Association for hosting us on this podcast. So as a quick recap, this is part two of a series for physicians in training to build your knowledge and awareness of real estate and how that should affect your decision matrix as you're coming out of your training programs. And in part one of the series, we really focused on coming out of your program and going to work for someone, going to work for a hospital system, going to work for a practice who is in an on-campus environment, or going to work for a practice who is in an off-campus environment. So in the second part of the series, we wanted to focus on physicians who are coming out of their programs and starting their own practice. So what I think is an important differentiator here is that we don't see this very often. And it happens for sure. And where we see it most often, where we see a physician coming right out of residency or right out of fellowship and starting their own practice, is when they are what we kind of lovingly call going home. And a good example would be you're at UAB training and you are from Heflin, Alabama, and your grandfather was a practitioner in Heflin, and he has always wanted you to come take over his practice. And so you're going to go home and quote unquote start your own practice, but you're really taking over kind of the reputation and what your family had set up. Or frankly, you're just from a smaller community and you've got great friends there and great connections, and you are making a lifestyle decision that's going to bring you back to that smaller market and start your own practice. Also, you might be participating in a rural health initiative. So you may be motivated in a lot of ways and have committed to a particular community to return. But going back to those smaller communities tend to be where we see physicians coming out of training and immediately starting their own practice. Coming out and starting your own practice immediately, you have to first understand why. Again, what is your specialty? And we've had clients who have been small, family practitioners who come out and they want to be on a hospital campus, and they might have a relationship with that hospital campus. And so they come out and they go right into, doing family medicine. It's highly likely a little bit more difficult to come out as a specialist, but going out and being on campus in a family medicine or maybe even a specialty path is something that it again is possibly a little bit easier, and you have less of a real estate decision to make. But the way that we kind of break it down is, are you going home? And that's our way of saying, are you going back to maybe a smaller market and getting out of the major metro or the place where you would have been in training? Or are you staying in, or are you from a larger metro area, and that's where you're deciding to go out and open up your own practice?
If you decide to remain or return to a metro or larger area, are there things to be mindful of?
So be aware that if you are in a larger metro area, the decision to immediately go out and start your own practice more than likely and more often leads to a higher risk scenario when it comes to real estate. And that could potentially adversely affect your practice right out of the gates. Again, you have likely got a higher cost and just more risk in general, which puts pressure on you from a real estate perspective when you're trying to get your medical practice going, and the last thing you need is undue pressure from real estate.
Are there things to be aware of regardless of the market someone might choose?
So if you're going in either place, if you're going into a smaller market or a larger market, first and foremost, you're going out on your own. You need to understand what you need and also understand the site selection, how to go find it. And what you need is so important. And I think so many people make assumptions as to what they need because they were told by someone, this is how you do it, or this space will be great for you. But in reality, what you really should get is what we call a program or a test fit. You need somebody to walk you through what type of physician are you? What is your specialty? Is it family medicine? Is it allergy? Is it dermatology? Is it oral surgery? And if it is, are you alone? Do you have a friend that you're starting your practice with? Are you going back and joining a family member? And whatever that case may be, is that the way you want it to stay? Are you planning on going into whatever town you're going into and practicing by yourself, and you know because of some element in your world that that's how you're going to stay for the rest of your career, or a pretty good bet that that's how you want it to be? Or do you see yourself as growing something, growing a practice, or growing into something bigger? And so how do you accommodate for that growth? And at what pace is it healthy to grow? So knowing those things, or at least having an idea of those things and being able to build that into the program to make sure that you do have room for growth, that's important.
For someone coming out of training, would you recommend that he or she purchase real estate immediately?
It is, and in this sense, it's a general rule of ours that unless you've got what we would call a cooked deal, unless you've got somebody who has set you up somewhere, it is generally our advice that it is not best to go immediately out and buy something. We think that getting at least 5 years under your belt in a lease scenario to discover who you are and who you want to be and how fast you're going to grow and who you want to be partners with is so important to do in a lease scenario rather than being committed in an acquisition or in a purchase ownership scenario where you may have just hemmed yourself in pretty early in your career. So important to remember that leasing is a pretty good option when you're coming out on your own for the first time.
When choosing a site, what are some things to be aware of?
So if you're looking at site selection, again, large market, small market, when you're looking at site selection, the types of things that you really need to pay attention to are parking. How many spaces do you need for your employees, and how many patients are coming in? What's your peak patient count per day? Can you park them on site? Is there adjacent land that you could buy or rent and expand your parking? Is there a friendly neighbor who barely uses parking and he will rent some to you? So parking is a really big factor. Access into the site. And how easy is it? How close to a major roadway? Access specifically into the building. Are you on the first floor, second floor? Is there an elevator? Is there handicap access? What is the signage and visibility? Is that important to you? So it may not have signage or good visibility. You may be 3 blocks off of a main thoroughfare, but does it matter? Does your practice get any benefit out of drive-by traffic? And small snippet, we would argue that some of our clients in the past would have answered, no, we are a specialist. It does not matter. They will come to me no matter what. And then they found themselves in a scenario where they had signage and they watched their patient count jump by 30%. So really assess that and get your arms around whether that matters or not.
Do demographics and location play a part in this?
Whatever market you're in, whether it's a small town or a large city, there are different demographics. There are different growth areas. There are areas that are dying and there are areas that are thriving. What area do you want to be in? What do you know about in terms of those demographics? And how does that affect the payer mix that you're going for? So maybe you are in a certain part of town with a certain demographic very intentionally, but just be aware of that. Be aware of how those things can interconnect. What are the traffic counts? So how many cars are passing in front of the building or at the main interchange every day? And how does that differ from some of the other sites that you're considering? What are your patient drive times? If you are coming out and you have bought a book of business maybe from somebody else, you've bought a patient list, where are they? And what is the location that best serves them? Maybe it's what is the location that best serves you as a physician, and that's okay. Prioritizing things like that is part of growth and part of starting your practice. And so you might want to be as close to your home as possible to mix a wonderful home life and as much time there as getting as much time as you can at the office. And so being close to home might be a major driving factor. And then, of course, your employees as well. Where are your employees going to come from and what's convenient for them? And that could be a recruitment model. If you've got an incredibly convenient location or a location that's around retail and things for your employees to do, after work or on lunch break, maybe that helps you recruit people.
Could you please tell our listeners more about leasing and what is involved with the process, especially in a smaller market?
We really suggest going into a lease scenario when you're starting out your own practice. And so things to be aware of when you're going down that path to sign a lease. And we're going to kind of break this out and say, if you're going into a smaller market, there's a series of things to be aware of. And if you're going to practice in a larger market, there are different things to be aware of. So if you're going into a smaller market, be aware that landlords in smaller markets, the owners of buildings that you will lease from, typically do not have a lot of cash sitting around where they can help you build out space. So if you find an old retail site or an old office building that you need to convert to medical, I would not count on the owners having cash to be able to help you do that. So be aware that you need to be saving your own or build that into a new practice loan. You will have to have some additional cash to build out your space. In general, in smaller markets, you are going to have less choices, fewer choices. There is less availability. Inherently in a smaller market, what makes it small is there's less real estate. And so not only that, but the connected point here is that there's highly likely far less medical real estate. So it is going to be harder to find something that makes sense for you. And a combination of these two elements, where you've got landlords who may be less willing to put in some money, and you've got fewer options to begin with, may begin to back you into a corner. And ultimately, you may make a decision on, what we would say is quote unquote less desirable space, but it's the only decision you've got. So be aware that going into a smaller market, you may just have to kind of take what comes your way and figure out a way to make it work. And it might not be the most ideal real estate scenario right out of the beginning.
What about leasing in a larger market?
In a larger market, you're unlikely to run into those things, although you might. But what's more likely that you need to be aware of is that landlords are going to be much more savvy. Chances of you being taken advantage of are much higher. And it's not out of maliciousness or dishonesty, but simply the landlord is going to make the assumption that you know what you are talking about. And so mistakes can be made, and they will not be looking out for your interest. So despite how nice they are, and no matter what they say, remember that they are not looking out for you. So be aware of the savvy landlord. Costs in general in larger markets are going to be higher. The cost of occupancy is going to be higher. The cost of land is going to be higher. The cost of parking, whatever the issue might be, costs are going to be higher. In larger markets, you are probably going to have more than one of your practice type. And so be aware of your competition. And does that really matter? Where are they? How close? Can you be right next to another one of X, whatever you happen to be practicing? Or do you really need to be in a pocket geographically by yourself? Does that matter? And where is your competition? It is far more likely in a larger market that you're going to be asked for a personal guarantee. A landlord is going to expect you to sign your name and your home and your personal assets to guarantee the lease that you sign, regardless of the fact that you may have just set up a professional entity. The landlord is highly likely going to ask you to personally guarantee it. Understand what that means and get okay with it in the beginning. So you're also going to find the upside is you're probably going to find landlords who do have more money and are willing to put more money into a deal and understand that that is a very normal part of the deal. So while you might be paying a higher rent and while you might be signing a personal guarantee, you also might have to come up with less cash up front. So you're going to have to balance those pros and cons, knowing that when a landlord gives you cash up front, you will almost certainly be paying higher rent. Landlords, along with that money in larger markets, will almost always expect longer lease terms. And so in a larger market commercial real estate world, a short-term lease is going to be 5 years from a medical perspective. Maybe you find somebody who will do a 3-year deal if you happen upon space that is already built out for a physician, but it is going to be the exception and not the rule. So we would also advise that when you're going out on your own and you're finding these spaces in larger markets, that you don't commit to any longer than a 5-year deal. Again, you don't really know where you are yet. You don't know what your practice is going to look like. Where's a sweet spot for you to operate, not only in size, but in geographic location. And so committing to any longer than 5 years could get you into some trouble and bind you into where you need to experience growth and you've got 3 years left on your lease or 2 years left on your lease, and it hems you in. And again, that's where real estate begins to become an anchor in your practice and not a buoy. In part one, you heard us use that phrase, and that's an important phrase.
As you go through this process, how important is it to have someone looking out for your interests?
For all of these factors, it is far more important in a larger market for you to have representation. Be represented. That might be an exceptional CPA. That might be an exceptional attorney with medical practice experience. That might be an exceptional real estate consultant. But in any event, you've got to have representation because your landlord and any party on the other side of the deal is not going to tell you to go get it, and they're not going to wait for you while you learn. So we think that that's an important point as well.
Could you please provide some insight for those who wish to purchase medical real estate?
So if you are going to go down the path to purchase, and again, as we've mentioned, we really focus on this, assuming that you are leaving a major metro, that you have a cooked deal somewhere back in a smaller market, and you have a much better idea of what your practice life cycle looks like. You are going into practice with your sister, and you guys are just going to practice in Heflin, Alabama for the rest of your careers. So you know what square footage you need, what location you need to be in, and you can identify those things. So that's the direction that we're going to kind of give guidance on. And so you still do have to be aware, though, of what it takes to go out and purchase real estate. First and foremost, what is your cash availability? And then what is your availability to be approved for debt and how much? So for your loan, normally a lender is going to ask you to put down 20% in cash. The most common question we get is, can I get a loan for my equity? Our answer is no. You need to have cold hard, pull it out from your savings account, piggy bank, out from under your pillow, cash. Now, be aware, there are lenders out there who will absolutely say yes. They will figure out a way to give you the money. They will figure out a way to let yourself be leveraged up to 90, 95, and 100% of the value of a deal. It is our strong suggestion that you do not get caught in this fly trap, okay? Be aware that just because somebody is willing to give you the money does not mean you should take it. So, you have figured out that you have got the cash. You have figured out that you can get approved for the loan of somewhere in the range of 80%. Be careful not to get too much space. Just because something's available and it feels like it's the right price and it feels like it's the best location, if it's 40% more space than you need, that's not going to end well. Square footage, the size of a building, eats you up way faster than your rent. And what we mean by that is paying $10 a foot for 5,000 square feet oftentimes is worse than paying $17 a foot for 2,200 square feet, which is really what you need. So being aware, going back to your program and your test fit, being aware of what you need, having a good program done from the beginning, and then buying along that program is going to help you stay out of trouble and buying too much square footage. Also understanding that the practice itself will not go buy anything. You as an individual, maybe you've set up a single entity LLC, you've set up a little company to go buy the real estate, but the practice will be leasing the real estate from an entity or from an individual or a group of individuals who has bought it. So that relationship is an important one. It may be a thin line, but it is a line and it does need to be aligned. There needs to be separation there. And with that in mind, are you setting something up to turn it into a cash flowing investment to where your practice pays rent every month and on an annual basis, you're getting a 7% return on the equity that you put into the deal? Or are you simply setting it up to say the rent that the practice pays simply pays the debt service of the building? It simply pays the mortgage. It pays the note. And over the years, our debt will be paid down. We will owe less on our building. And then that will be our investment in the long run. So understanding what your goals are there and expectations are going to be important. Along the same lines as a lease, understanding the cost of occupancy. So even if you've bought a building, when you add the debt service plus all of the operating expenses of the building, what is your total cost of occupancy? And does that make sense? Does that cost of occupancy put you at 5% of your gross revenue, or does it put you at 25% of your gross revenue? It does not matter how much you like the building, but if your cost of occupancy is at 25 or 30% of your gross revenue, it's going to be an anchor that pulls down your practice. It does not matter that you're an owner at that point. It's a problem, not an investment. So understand that. And then what's your end game? So real estate is only an investment. You only get a return on that initial equity really when you sell it, when you get to take that equity back out of the deal, just like a house. And so understanding what your end game is, when do you think you would sell it? Who do you think would buy it? What does the market look like and who are your likely buyers? How big of a market are you in? And how long is your debt for? And that's really two elements. Your bank is going to give you a loan. It is not like buying a house. So you're going to get a loan that is probably going to expire in 5, 7, maybe 10 years, and you're going to have to go renew your loan with a new rate. How they spread the payments out is completely different. They may spread the payments out over 15, 20, or 25 years. And so understanding that dynamic and how that connects to your eventual sale is going to be important, but good to understand that the debt you get is going to be different than what you would get to buy a home.
This has been extremely informative. Are there any additional pieces of advice you would like to provide our listeners?
So in closing, we want you to remember that based on our experience, we really don't advise purchasing right out of residency or fellowship. There are exceptions to every rule, but those decisions tend to lead to more difficulties than success. With the aforementioned idea of you're going into a smaller market, into a cook deal, and the ownership is coming at you from an angle that was already set up. So you really do, you need some time under your belt to determine how your practice runs, where is your patient base, where is your sweet spot. And then also remembering that real estate, the presence, the waiting room, the parking scenario, the access, the drive time, that all of these are big factors in patient satisfaction. And the reality of today's medicine is that in a consumer-driven world, patient satisfaction is a big element for your success. So it's no longer just okay to be an amazing physician. We wish that it was okay, but it's not. It's different. Patients do expect a different experience. And so acknowledging that your real estate plays a big role in that is going to be an important factor of success for your new venture. And we wish you the best of luck with that.
Nancy or Peter, is there anything you would like to add?
Just so the audience kind of gets the questions that we generally receive more times than not. Our number one question, I'll ask you, what do you think the number one question is when we have a client in a lease? They call us and they ask us what?
Can I get out of my lease? Or can you get me out of my lease?
Right. And so back to the point of knowing what your term is, and there are no outs of leases. Yes, they can be put into your contract, but generally they don't always match up with what happens in life. So you've got to be really careful on your term. Another big question is, who's responsible for this leak that I have? I mean, it seems like it should be the landlord. I mean, I'm paying a bunch of rent to this guy and he won't come fix it. Well, there's some language in your lease that says you're responsible for certain parts, he's responsible for certain parts. So really understanding that from the get-go, that when you walk in and your equipment is destroyed because of something, that might be on you. That might be your insurance claim, not on your landlord. And then another big one that kind of happens, and this literally just happened with a client of ours, my rent's supposed to be $20 a square foot, and they're sending me an extra bill at the end of the year, and it has just upped it to almost $30 a square foot. That's out of market. I don't understand. Well, that's all of those charges as operating expense charges or common maintenance charges that are put in on leases that you do have to be prepared for. And understand that sometimes, especially with your CAM charges or your common area maintenance charges, you will get sometimes a bill for charges that are higher than what was guesstimated. So it's grossly important to be educated, or to at least have someone on your team that can remind you of all these little factors that can make or break that part of your practice. Being strapped financially, coming out with debt these days, with the way reimbursement works, with COVID-19, the changes that happen in our practices, medicine is not as predictable as it always has been. Yet, you got to try to control as much as you can. And real estate is one of those things that you can control.
And all of that is done when the lease is signed.
Absolutely.
not a renegotiation. You've got to be aware of those things when you sign the lease. So great points, Nancy.
Absolutely, because if you signed a lease and you decide 2 years later, you're in a 5-year lease that, hey, it would really work better if I did Y, there's no incentive for the landlord to go, okay, we'll change it and we'll recreate or we'll renegotiate. At that point, what's done is done. And then the last thing I'll add, kind of as a recap of both of these podcasts, a lot of this information seems way off. I mean, it's kind of like when your mom asks you questions, you're like, who knows? I'm only 20 years old right now. But they are seeds. They are seeds for you to be successful. But I also challenge you to take this information, kind of study it a little bit. When you're going in for your interviews, this might very well be what sets you apart from the next guy interviewing for position. That you understand that real estate is part of a medical practice, that you understand the health of a practice, and that you are able to ask the question of, not where will I be in 5 years, but where will this practice be in 5 years? Meaning, how is it running? Is it lean? Is it fat? What opportunities are there to grow? Just having good interview skills and being able to ask the right questions does make a difference and does set you apart from your competition.
Thank you very much for spending some time with us today. This has been a very beneficial and informative series of podcasts. And again, thank you very much for your time and sharing your information with us.
Thanks, Jennifer, for having us. We really enjoyed it and look forward to doing more.
Yes, good luck.
Thank you. We appreciate your time today.
SMA podcasts are available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, or Stitcher Radio.